Utah Stories podcast is brought to you by Utah State, home of the Aggies. Living on campus means more sleep, more friends, and better grades. While others are driving or walking to campus, you are getting those precious extra minutes of sleep. Instead of going home to mom or your cat, you're hanging out with roommates, neighbors, and friends. 84% of USU students live away from home, making on-campus housing a community of academic support, peers, mentors, friends, and constant activities. For a virtual tour, room details, theme options, and to apply, visit usu.edu/housing. The Utah Story Show is brought to you by Legends. Legends is locally owned and operated and is serving up all your classic favorites and unique originals too. Their food is made fresh with real, wholesome, delicious ingredients. They have everything from awesome appetizers to main dishes like steaks, burgers, sandwiches, salads, pizzas, and calzones, plus a new gluten-free and vegetarian options. Finish off your meal with mouth-watering desserts. They have a full bar, and they have excellent lineup of local craft beers. I suggest you go check out one of the upcoming Jazz games or UVU games at Legends. It's always off the hook awesome there. And kick back and watch your favorite games on big screens. They have the best food and sports in town. Call ahead and reserve a space if you're going to bring a large group. And Legends accommodates all ages. They have 2 locations to serve you, one at downtown Salt Lake City at 677 South, 200 West, and one in Southtown, brand new, at 10631 South Holiday Park Drive. So, on the program today is Zach Moses. You're going to hear his whole story, so I'm not going to go into the whole introduction, but he's considered one of the top minds in LGBTQ travel, and he's the CEO of He Travel. He hired in December of 2010 as the Think Outside of the Box Millennial. Zach took on the task of rebuilding and reimagining the brand, helping the company to recover from the Great Recession and become the world's largest LGBTQ plus tour operator. Thanks for being on the show, Zach.
Thanks for having me. It's a difficult acronym.
Yeah, I really stumble over that. I got to get better at that. So you were voted one of the top 35 travel professionals under the age of 30 in 2013. Tell me, what did you do to build that up?
Well, this was at a time when nobody knew what to do. We had gotten into the recession. People were starting to crawl out of it, but technology was changing. Everything was moving into the internet, and so many companies were being left behind. Companies that had been completely successful pre-recession just couldn't get out of it. So when I came in and I saw these separate brands being run and I looked at the infrastructure of the company, I just said, why are you not a .com? Why don't you identify as a .com? Why aren't you? And we had a big meeting about it for the rebranding, and we found that 95% of our customers were gay men. So we became He Travel, which is the acronym for Hansevanston, and that was the original gay travel company founded in 1973. Cool. So it was Hansevanston Travel Incorporated, and so that acronym just sort of like our brand was staring us in the face. And
yeah,
so
that seems very apropos. And so when you were brought on, was your objective to basically take the marketing over and to restructure the company to be more of a .com? Was that your role?
It wasn't my original objective. I basically came in, and the owner, after I got a little bit oriented to everything, said, and this was in, I don't know, I believe it was February of 2011, said to me, "Oh, I see that you're doing a good job. I see that our sales are up, but you've got to come up with something, because basically we're just closing the doors in May." Wow. If you can't find a solution, because it'd been bleeding out for so long trying to keep people employed, and it was just, the recession was too long. Yeah. And so I had to go completely out of the box and just say, okay, we're a whole new thing. We have to start behaving like a new, nimble startup, even though we already had an almost 40-year history at that point. we had to start behaving like a new technology company would. And now we've gotten to a point when I go to a trade show and I start telling people what we're doing with virtual reality, how how we interact with the customers, what our goals are with our website. They start saying, "You're really a technology company. You're a technology company moonlighting as a travel company."
That's awesome. And this is, I want to use this as a segue into what made you decide to run for governor. And obviously, you know how to think outside of the box. Utah is very much inside of the box. What was your original motivation to decide, I think I can take this on? I think I could do this.
Well, because I just can. This is, we're Americans. We
you
have
got to be
so
over
much.
the age of 35.
Yeah,
right?
Originally I was looking at president, and everyone was like, "Don't you think you should dial it back? You haven't been in politics before." So running for governor was actually me dialing it back and trying to make a more clear path to where I may go in the future. And the more I thought about that, the more I started paying attention to what was going on in Utah. The same things that drove me to leave my state for looking for work in California and then going to Florida and always coming back in between. But I always found I grew up Mormon. So we have that busy bee work ethic. Yeah, I grew up here in Utah. Nice. And we had that busy bee work ethic that even being here in Utah, busy bee work ethic or not, most people get at best a $12 an hour job. And you can't make a living on that. So I left Utah looking for opportunity. And everywhere I went, my coworkers would be like, "Slow down, Zach, you're making us look bad." And I'm like sitting here feeling like I'm kind of just not really trying all that hard. I'm a young guy just being like, "Oh, I'm not going to work that hard." And I just realized how hard everybody in Utah works. Like if you leave Utah, if you're from here and you leave Utah, you will make way more money wherever you go. If you just chat with people, they're so short-handed on workers. Yeah. And just that work ethic that isn't just the Mormons, it's anyone who's grown up in Utah. That culture has bled over. And it's just the dominant culture of our state now. And it's powerful. That's why we're the Beehive State.
Well, I think it's why we would never be perceived as a tech hub. I don't think if you talk to people originally in Silicon Valley 20, 30 years ago, I don't think that they would think that a next big tech hub is going to be Utah. But we work so hard, and they're able to find so many smart engineers who are family oriented, who are like just happy to just type in front of their computer screen all day. And when I worked for a tech company, I found exactly what you're talking about. It's just like everybody was working so hard. And unlike other jobs that I'd been to, it was just like this who can work the hardest mindset. And I was like, this has got to be kind of an anomaly. And so is that what you found when you first entered the workforce, or was that?
Like when I entered the workforce in Utah, everybody's got a good work ethic. That's not really a big leg up. When I left Utah, Utah work ethic, you just carried.
That's what propelled you.
Yeah, every job you get, if you just take that work ethic that we all grew up with and just apply it in your job, you're the first to be promoted. You get to the top of companies. Every job that I had, I was always in management. Within days of being hired for just a technician task, I would get promoted. And it was that work ethic.
Nice. And so when you were considering, you want to make change, you want to run for office, you were working primarily in Florida with your travel agency, is that correct? Or at what point were you like, I got to do this?
Yeah, well, we'd use the term snowbird. So these are the people who don't really like the winter, and they go back and forth. So I've had my house in Utah for a dozen years, and I have an apartment on the back. So I would go back and forth, but I would go make my money in Florida, and then I bring it home to make improvements here. As far as running, when I was in Florida, in Key West, there were a lot of people saying, you should run for the mayor. I was really popular in the town there. And they say, you should run for mayor. And I don't know. That wasn't, being the mayor of Key West wasn't my dream. What I actually saw more in Key West, I was making so much money. I was bringing so much cash in, and it was really hard to find anybody with that good Utah work ethic like I had. Mm-hmm. And I just said, I could take this home. I could make more opportunities in my home state. And because this is a work from home job, this is where we could employ mothers who are home with their children. They just have to be on a chat window. Mm-hmm. We could be employing people with disabilities, people who couldn't normally get another job. It's even if you can't type on a computer, you can use voice recognition now to respond really easily to people. So I just saw so much opportunity. And when I talked to my friends that I went to high school with, while my life had gone up, I came to talk to people back home, and they were just still living in the 1990s. It's like nothing had changed, but just this new population was coming in and people being brought in for tech jobs. Well, meanwhile, our local population's just being disenfranchised. And the more that I saw that, I started feeling like maybe I should run for something. I should really run for something. And I was meeting with people from the Salt Lake Economic Development Department, and we were talking about, I'm trying to put a cafe on Indiana Avenue, which is just a services dead zone in Salt Lake. And I was meeting with them, and we were talking about ideas, and we got on all, this was right before the last election where we did all the public referendums. And all of our legislators were literally coming out and saying publicly in this show of might that did not matter what we did not matter how we voted. They were going to rewrite anything we made how they thought it would be best because we'd elected them to be our representatives. Mm-hmm. And at that moment, I just said, wow, our entire legislature just tendered their resignation and just asked the population to change them out because these are the ones that we elected. Mm-hmm. We put them in, and they clearly don't agree with what the citizens want. So they've got to go. And so to be the change I want to see in my community, I said, I'll do this.
Nice. Yeah, I got to say, I am not by nature at all a political person. I don't like covering politics. I don't like talking to politicians. But that issue, when that started coming down in February, it changed the whole format of Utah Stories. It made me realize that this show has to be politically oriented because there is this massive disconnect between the people and our government. And when you start to see the state legislature, I'll preface this statement saying I love Mormon people. Half my family's Mormon. My assistant is Mormon. I absolutely love Mormon people. But I have to stand up and I have to say, when the economy wants to, when one church wants to dominate the entire economy and decide they're going to rewrite the will of the people to allow them to economically dominate an entire sector of our economy, I found the term that I think most describes it, and it's a fascistic monopoly. And I don't believe that is right at all. As much as I love the church and what it does in the world, as much as I love Mormon people, this is a reach of power that is very much tyrannical, and it's fascistic, and it's monopolistic. I mean, you can call it all sorts of different things, but it's a massive disconnect between what the people want and what they are actually providing to us. And so when you told me that that was the reason that sparked you to run for governor, I was like, man, I think you could actually get elected, because there's got to be not just a lot of non-Mormons thinking that, but a lot of people in the LDS community that are seeing this overstep by the church and are probably like, this is going way too far. We passed Proposition 2. They turn it into a way for them to monopolize cannabis just as they monopolized liquor. We passed Proposition 2 or 3, which was supposed to enable more people to get access to Medicaid. They say, nope, we're not going to do that.
We even tried to raise our own taxes on that one, and they wouldn't let us raise our own taxes, why? I mean, we've got millions and millions of federal dollars sitting on the table. we paid those federal taxes, and it's our representatives at the federal level. It's their job to fight to get some of that money, maybe even more than we paid in, back to the state. That's how this works.
Yeah.
And the federal government's saying, here's some money. I'm going to pay for your health care, almost all of it, 100% until 2016, and then we'll pay 93% until the end of 2020.
It's not a funding issue.
Yeah,
it's just like we want to grab control of what's going on here, and I mean, culturally, I see what's happening, and I can only attribute it to what's happening culturally in Salt Lake. We are electing more LGBTQ plus people to represent us in mayor, in the state legislature. Do you think that maybe the church is just like trying to grasp that last bit of control they can have on the changing culture of Salt Lake City? I mean, what do you think it is?
Any organization, when it's overstepping its bounds, and not necessarily the whole organization, but members of an organization are starting to feel threatened in the way they're conducting business, you always see this big show. It's sort of the death throes, that it's, they see the writing on the wall, they see where it's going, and they start trying to consolidate power and cut off any way that anybody can modify how they're behaving so they can hang on to that. And that's not what we're about. No. I know that we're a representative republic, but we have a very democratic population, and we expect some level of democracy. Otherwise, we as Americans shouldn't say we're spreading democracy around the world.
No.
So we have public referendums. That is our constitutional right. And in fact, the next public referendums need to be making sure constitutionally that the legislature can never pull this on us again. We make public referendums to tell them they're not doing their job. So when they just turn around and overthrow that, they're clearly not doing their job, and they need to go.
Yeah. Well, when you see that the way the state legislature just is by nature, the counties in Utah are sending their members of the state legislature to come to Capitol Hill for those 45 days or whatever of the session. They're all over from Utah. But as I keep learning, they're getting their marching orders from the church. And I found out by just talking more and more to people, there's a guy in the Senate named Senator Alan Vickers, and there's a guy in the House named House Member Brad Daw, who tell the members what the church wants via Marty Stevens, who was the former House Speaker. So if all of these puppets are being controlled by the church and they're all being told what to do, which I can't say I know that's what's happening, but that's what I've been told is happening. How is it that anything we can do as voters in Salt Lake City is going to really make a difference if all these representatives are coming from other counties that, have just as much power and control as we have?
Well, one, put in a different governor. So if we try to change our Senate, if we try to change the House, we have to change so many seats before we have checks and balances. You change the governor, instant checks and balances. You can't gerrymander that seat. Every single person in Utah is entitled to their vote for governor. You do not have to vote one color. You do not have to be on just one team. It's not about teams. It's about lifting people up. And when we're having a booming economy in Utah, all ships should rise with that tide. Not just the people who are coming in from out of state who want to enjoy a better standard of living. Not just the few that are educated really well and can get up there. Utah needs to be a mentor state and help every single human being in Utah be the best possible person that they can be. Not a police state, not a theocracy. We need to be a mentor state, and we need to help everybody. These are our fellow human beings, one human family. If you're Mormon, you called them all brothers and sisters. It's like, let's be what Utah's ideals are. Let's be what we were raised to be, how they taught us to be in school. If you went to church and you were in primary school, they did not tell you to behave like they do on the Hill right now. Yeah. So just because those guys go to church does not mean that they deserve to be our leaders.
Well, the way I'm looking at it too is like, when I was 12 years old, I had the decision to be Mormon or non-Mormon. I'd gone to primary. I was going to be a deacon. I didn't like church. It was boring. I decided not to be a member. That was never an issue with my friends. My friends were all Mormons. We all liked each other. We were all friends. Didn't matter at all. But as soon as I started getting into later years of high school, I could feel the inclusivity of the Mormon doctrine taking hold on the minds of my friends. They were just like not inviting me to stuff. They knew I wasn't part of their club. Do you think that culture of inclusivity, that culture of kind of creating an us versus them, like we are the Latter-day Saints, we are the ones who will be I can't remember if they believe in the rapture or if they believe just Christ is going to come down and all the Mormons are going to be saved and everybody's damned to hell. Do you think that could be the reason why we are seeing this greater divide between the city and the state and the us versus them going on?
I honestly just think it has more to do with the people who are in power at the top. If you go and you meet a millennial Mormon, they're going to line up philosophically really closely to how you line up. What's happened is the people who are in leadership are following the same ideal that they've been following since the 60s and 70s, and they're just not paying attention to the younger base. So I have fantastic Mormon neighbors. And we're all friends. They come to my parties. At my parties, I always go out of my way. I'm like, oh, there's going to be my Mormon neighbors who don't drink, so we need to make sure that we have plenty of options for them, and we need to make sure that the alcohol is out of reach of their children. I mean, it's respect from one community to another community. And
you see it's actually a pretty small percentage who have that narrow-mindedness, thinking, where they're always the first question on their mind is, are you Mormon or are you non-Mormon? And it's the only state, I think, in the whole country where they classify we all classify a whole group of people as non-Mormon, and that's
well, it's similar if you go to Israel.
I guess so. Probably.
You have the specific communities. There's the Muslim community, there's the Jewish community, and the Christian community. Jerusalem is actually divided into those three quarters, and then everyone else is, everyone that's not Jewish is a Gentile. So sort of, and growing up Mormon, you heard them, you actually read about it being, referring to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
But Gentile means good person.
Yeah.
Everybody, we're all one human family. We're all good people. Mm-hmm. For my Mormon neighbors, I like them. So much of growing up Mormon.
Well, so many of the people I've really come to love, like I worked with Mormons for 9 years. I can say I love these people. They're Mormons, and they're all around, and they're awesome people. And it's like I want to look at you like a brother and a sister, and most of them want to look at us the same way, but it seems like there's a disconnect between most of the Mormon people and, I think, like you said, the power hierarchy, the patriarchy.
Those are two entirely different things. You have, and even in the church, you have the for-profit arm that, if you look at what it does in the world, it doesn't necessarily line up with what the religious side is saying. So what we're taught, how we're raised, it's fantastic. It's a good medium to live by. Like golden rule. Do unto others as they would do as you'd have them do unto you. I mean, come on. Like, why wouldn't you treat people how you'd want them to treat you? Mm-hmm. That's a no-brainer. We don't need special rules to tell us that, yet it seems that sometimes we do. So, be fellowship and helping your neighbors and you know, if you're in church and you fall on hard times, you can go in and get assistance from the church, and they'll offer that assistance to non-members. They'll try to encourage you to join, but what organization wouldn't try to encourage you to join if they're giving you assistance?
Well, and I've seen people abuse that. Absolutely. Like I have a rental property. The tenants were drinking alcohol all the time and using either meth or heroin. I don't know what it was, but they were freaking terrible. They trashed the house. But I saw at least 3 rent checks were written by the Mormon Church, and I don't think that they even examine whether or not you deserve it or you're in line. If you're, say you need it and you're part of that, they consider you part of their community, they're going to pay your rent.
Yeah.
What other churches or organization is going to do that?
Those are some of the things that really impress me
Yeah.
about the Mormon Church, that they'll actually do render that kind of aid. And I think what that causes, though, is a little bit of a disconnect, because rendering that aid is our government's responsibility. It is our government's responsibility to make sure that all of the citizens are being taken care of. And whether or not we want to try and lift them up, have them do work, everything like that, doesn't change the fact that we are 54,000 housing units short in Utah. And people are living on the street. And a lot of these people are Utah natives, born and raised here, who've been rendered homeless as new people come in. And those new people are coming in because our government went out and started trying to build industry as fast as possible here and did not keep pace with housing.
Yeah.
And we should have kept pace with housing.
Way behind as far as housing goes.
Way behind. And we've got to get outside the box on that. So, I don't want to vilify any church that's trying to help people. Mm-hmm. What needs to be vilified is our government that just fell down on the job, and they're coming in at the last minute and finally funding some things and trying to get them done. Stuff they should have been doing decades ago with all of their future planning for business. Where was the planning to make sure we could house everyone? We can see the birth rate. Mm-hmm. We're encouraging outsiders to come in, but this should have been on everybody's radar. But
so do you have ideas as far as affordable housing goes, like solving that massive problem we have right now?
Well, yeah. Some of the big ones, why are we building everything so squat?
Yeah.
We're having this huge housing crisis.
You go to Denver, there's like 40-story apartment units.
Yeah.
And we're like surprised to see a 5-story.
Yeah, we've got a pollution problem, and we're going to start leveling all the trees and building all these squat buildings. And why are those buildings not 30 stories tall instead of 5? We're 54,000 housing units short. Let's see a Fifth Element super tower. Let's redefine what a house is. It doesn't have to be single family. You need a place to lock up your stuff, take a shower, go to the bathroom, sleep. You could probably accomplish that in less than 80 square feet. Mm-hmm. We don't need to have big, huge apartments. We need some pods.
Yeah.
How do you recondition people to accept that?
Yeah, that's exactly.
That's
exactly right. Well, it's not so much you got to recondition people, but zoning laws. So I studied this issue in the springtime because Moab has this terrible affordable housing crisis too. All these really awesome rock climbers, the people who really make up the bedrock of that culture, they can't find affordable housing, and they're having to move out of Moab, and it's just a NIMBY culture now. It's like people who've moved there who have money, and they're forcing out all the cool people because nobody can afford to live there. So I started studying the issue. What I found is, so Ben Carson is the head of HUD for all the national programs. NIMBYism runs absolutely rampant in any area where real estate prices have escalated a lot, meaning that not in my backyard. You can change zoning laws away from me, but nowhere near me do I want to see a giant building full of millennials who are using a locker and a tiny 500 square foot studio. And that's the endemic problem. So it's like, how do you get around that? Because they're actually giving federal funding to any community that will change their zoning laws.
Let's look at this from another perspective. Those people with their single-family homes are the parents of those 5 to 15 children that they had. And they should have thought about how much land was going to be used up before they had that many children. We have so many young people here. Utah has the largest per capita population of young people in the nation. Yeah. And they need homes. And they can't buy homes right now. They're delaying having families. They're just drowning in student debt. And meanwhile, we're trying to maintain this 1940s, 50s suburban settlement mentality, and we're out of space. Get up above the Salt Lake Valley, get above Utah Valley, go out to Ogden, get up above it and take a look. We're out of space.
Yeah.
Like, we have to go up. And when you go down to Moab and those little canyons, they're out of space. Yeah. And every new development we do is this, everyone wants as much space around their one house as possible. And that's just not even good for the economy. No. Like, don't you guys want to make money in a real estate deal? Like, you've got all these millennials who are mostly spending their money on travel and experiences because they can't have anything in this world because it got gobbled up by the previous generation. And do you know who the number one purchaser of American land was last year? Foreign Chinese.
Really?
It's not even Americans buying the land.
That. Yeah, I heard about that, and I was like, does that really happen? And I asked a couple real estate agents who it's Market Source Realty in Sugar House, and I was like, is that for real? And they said whenever there's a real competitive property and there's like a bidding war, these outside interests come in and they know that that's like going to be a great deal if they get it. And it's like inevitably somebody connected to Chinese.
And they're always dropping cash too.
Yeah.
Something that no local could even dream of doing unless they were born to oodles of money. And they're just waltzing in and just bam, here's a bunch of cash. And of course that happened. We shipped a bunch of jobs over there when we were kids. Our parents, our grandparents shipped a bunch of jobs over, and all of that wealth from the United States moved to Asia. And now that wealth is coming back in the form of land purchases, company purchases.
Yeah, they need to bank. They need to find a bank which is not connected to currency, and land is the very best bank you can put your money in.
Exactly. And as an investor, their portfolio, they're making a great investment. But as a humanitarian, look at what's happening. 54,000 housing units short. We've got problems with Airbnb doing this too. And I was living in Key West, and a tiny little 2-mile by 4-mile island, beautiful island, largest collection of 19th century wooden Victorians in the country. And it's this perfect little place, but everybody's buying and selling and trading that land, and the value goes up and up and up, and all the people who were living on that island were completely disenfranchised. And then Airbnb and VRBO moves in, and then they start taking what little rental pool is available and thinning that out further, and landlords want to make money. So they're going to charge what the market will bear. But meanwhile, nobody's wages are keeping pace with that.
Yeah.
And I mean, this isn't just a problem on the horizon. This is a problem that is exploding in our faces, and our leaders are doing nothing about it beyond just the very minimum that they must do in order to prevent just mobs storming the hill. Yeah. We can do better. We can do better. We're the only state that stayed in the black through the recession. And we did that at the expense of our people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I look at the problem and I see that the people who are in the decision-making seats, they're in the rural areas. I mean, the way the state legislature's set up, they don't have a housing problem. They don't experience it. And then I look at this inland port thing. They don't experience the pollution we're going to feel from the inland port. They're out in like San Pete County or Wayne County they're just out there. But they're the ones voting to have a committee decide that we're going to have a inland port authority, a national inland port authority, and we want that in Utah. And we want the hub in our northwest quadrant where there's 30,000 acres of space. No, 15,000 acres. Rocky Anderson was on
16.6 or something.
Yeah, that's right. Rocky Anderson was in here talking about it. But that was never something brought before the public or said, hey, do you guys want this? That, again, has been jammed down our throats.
Not only that, they want to bring in nuclear waste with that deal, and they actually are trying to move all of the decision-making power on that away from states and municipalities so that how that waste is managed is being handled by global mining conglomerates, or not the mining conglomerates, it's global holding companies. The mining conglomerates just destroy our western mountains. We'll get onto that later. But yeah, we're not even going to make our own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to be our representatives who protect us.
Yeah.
And they don't even want to be involved in those decisions. The inland port, if you go to the northwest quadrant, it's already happening there. It was happening organically. That was zoned light industrial. Whether or not that should be protected land, because when you look at it from a satellite, it looks like wetlands to me.
Yeah,
but
it's a swamp.
Yeah, but that was already zoned that way. So if you drive out there now, you'll see there's already piles of train cars, there's tracks, everything. When the city stepped in...
The northwest quadrant is?
Yeah, northwest quadrant.
So they've already got train tracks there?
Dude, there's been train tracks there since the trains came in. Like, we moved huge... They're going to bring in more tracks. They're going to put in more stuff.
Yeah, you mean the eastern part of the northwest quadrant, I guess.
Yeah, the eastern part of the northwest quadrant.
Woods Crosses and the sewage waste facility.
Yeah, so that's how previous people have already zoned that land. So the inland port established a port authority. Salt Lake City tried to beat the state to the punch, but both sides were trying to establish an inland port, both of them. And what they're really fighting about is who gets to charge taxes on it. That's the heart of the deal. Who gets to make the tax money, the state
incremental tax.
Or the city? Yeah, and that's a different discussion that we can go into further. As far as the pollution that you brought up, with it already being an inland port, I don't really understand what the point is of us going in there and adding a port authority unless the intention of it is to make it develop in a better way, to make it not look like the garbage that they did out in Lehigh, where they just destroyed the ecosystem. You know, people used to go out there and hunt quail, and now it's just parking lot, big building, traffic problems. There was no proper planning that happened when they put that development in. And up there in that northwest quadrant, we're talking the last track of undeveloped, beautiful land. You go out there now, yeah, there's some trains and stuff going through, but you also see antelope hopping around. I mean,
that's right up against the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's inappropriate,
it's
just like it was inappropriate to put that prison out there. But if you're going to put something out there, can't we put out something that isn't hideous? Can't we put out something that maybe these trucks come in and then we switch them over to electric? Or let's bring in Hyperloop freight. India's got plans for Hyperloop now in 2 different regions.
What's Hyperloop?
Hyperloop is a pneumatic tube. Elon Musk put this out several years ago and just opened the patent to everybody. So Virgin Hyperloop is the biggest company doing it.
I think they just barely did like a first little test run.
Yeah, they got
now building.
Yeah, someone just set the speed test record, and this was over 0.8 miles. They got the Hyperloop cars up to 288 miles per hour.
Really?
So Hyperloop passenger and freight has theoretical speeds up to 700 miles per hour on the ground. We don't have to fly up and get exposed to all that radiation and up and higher in the atmosphere. No more risk of plane crashes. When you've got a tube, the tube is almost a vacuum inside. So the pods inside are floating with magnetic levitation and moving through almost a situation like you'd have up in space, where there's no friction slowing you down.
The bank thing when you put your money into
Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, so they're actually they've set the speed record now at 288. Next year there's one coming online in Europe. I'm trying to remember where it's at. It's like Netherlands or somewhere. But I'll find this out. Don't quote me on that one. Well, I'm on the radio. So, they're actually, I think they've got like a 1.5 mile test track that they'll be bringing online. In India, they've actually set Hyperloop now as considered to be standard public works projects. So that was paving the way.
So this is different than Elon Musk's idea to put all the traffic underground.
That's like, the boring company.
Yeah, the boring
tunnels.
company. Yeah, I saw that.
It's very boring.
Man, I guess
company.
I'm out of the loop. I didn't hear about the pneumatic tube.
How would you pay for something like that?
You don't. You zone it. That's where we need to start, is through zoning.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go find the investors to do it. Or if we find that there's enough public interest in it, we start raising capital to do this. But the first step is planning for it. That's what the whole inland port is about. And there's nothing future forward in the plan.
Yeah.
There's nothing about making things green. There's nothing about our environment. There's nothing about using new technology. Why isn't there a spaceport? We've already got an inland port. We're already the crossroads of the West. Why, if we're making an inland port, it needs to be providing a new kind of transportation for us. So it should have Hyperloop as part of the plan, and it should have a spaceport. Push it out to the West Desert so we don't have to hear sonic booms, but make it part of the port. The space industry is $350 billion right now and expected to go to $2.7 trillion by 2040. And that's all materials up there polluting no one.
Yeah.
Like here,
I
the people in Magna have
Jeff
a tailings
Bezos
pond.
wants to do manufacturing in space so we don't pollute the planet.
Well, there's also a lot of resources that are on the moon that we don't have in much supply on Earth. Things like helium-3. It's destroyed in our atmosphere. It comes out of the sun. It's destroyed in our atmosphere. But thanks to the Apollo program, we know that the regolith of the moon is littered in it. And there were estimates back in the 90s where they said, if we could get the space shuttle to the moon and bring back just enough helium-3 to fill the space shuttle, they could theoretically power the whole planet for a year off of that much material. Now, modern scientists might say, oh, it's a little different, whatever, but why do you think there's a space race to the moon right now? We've got all these different countries all rushing to the moon. The United States is back in. Yeah. It's suddenly because the Chinese are winning the race to the moon.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we're like, we've got to go back, whatever we have to do, because they're not going there to just plant a flag and beat Russia like we did. They're going there because they see the economic potential of it, and we just left it. We stopped going back. It fell out of popularity. And now we're to the point that billionaires are risking their fortunes because they know space prospecting. Obama signed it into law, said that whatever you get in space, you get to bring back. Utah needs a piece of that pie. Pretty soon, no one's going to stand for dirty mining on Earth that pollutes people. It might take 100 years before we have a full space economy, but once we get to the point that we're doing our mining up on Luna, or we're going to the asteroid belt, or we're towing an asteroid back to go around the Earth. They found one asteroid that they estimate has $14 trillion worth of gold in it, and it's a near-Earth asteroid. We're going to space. It's just whether or not Utah's going to be part of that.
Well, you definitely think like a millennial.
Of course. I actually think like the greatest generation. They went to space last time.
That's
it was
true.
The people in between who stopped.
We had a kid working for us, and he's like, my goal is to be one of the first 1,000 people up to the moon. And if I die trying to go, that's cool with me.
If you go
and I was like, that's your goal in life? To be put in a rocket, and if you just happen to die? And he's like, yeah, I want to go to space.
Yeah, so if you look at our travel company, we do all 7 continents, and because we can't do space yet, but we fully believe, Virgin Galactic has flown first private craft flying around the world. SpaceX is building the Starship right now so they can go to Mars and land back and forth between the moon.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then all the money Bezos is dumping into his spaceship program. And I'm just like looking at it. Are you really that certain that our planet is going to be so terribly shitty in the next 100 years that we're going to have to live on Mars?
It already is shitty.
Well,
get on a plane and leave Utah. Utah is beautiful. We don't understand.
But I mean, you
Like,
take the worst environment on planet Earth, go to Antarctica. That is still so much better than Mars. I mean, it's just like Antarctica. We can have a. My friend went up there to do studies for geology. You can have a big heated tent, but if you go outside, you got to completely cover your face, and you can die pretty quickly. I mean, you multiply that by 20 if you go to Mars. It just would be so hard.
But
to
I'm
live
sure
there.
we had the same arguments when, pilgrims were coming across the ocean in wooden boats, where they were going to spend months, get rickets and scurvy, only to land in a foreign land that very likely they were going to get killed or die of a disease.
Scary, but it was full of fish and game, and everywhere you look, there's food and abundance. And you go to Mars, and there's nothing. I mean, if you can find some water, great, but I don't think it's going to be like Matt Damon planting potatoes in his poop, and I don't think that'll be possible.
I loved that. Did you read the book? The book was...
No, I got to read the book.
The book is so much better.
Only books that consistently had me laughing out loud.
Just nonstop. I read it to my son, and he was like, the moment the movie came out, he's like, we gotta go. And then we watched the movie, and he was like, that was a letdown, because he's like, the book was so good. So here's the thing on Mars. I'm not advocating that Utah flies a ship to Mars. Mm-hmm. I'm advocating that Utah built a spaceport so that these private companies trying to do that.
I mean, my first response to that is we got this West Desert that's actually already got theoretically a spaceport. There's something called Richardson Airfield. It's totally on the down low, but it's big enough to land a space shuttle. And when we did the story that's like right behind you on our poster, that was when we talked to people who are working in the West Desert and UFO and alien watching. They just go they go on a high mountain, and if they can go quiet enough at night, they can actually spy on what's going on there. And there are beams of light that go straight up into space. It's like a laser beam, but intensified by many, many times. And stuff goes up and it disappears and stuff levitates. You can see all sorts of crazy crap going on over there. And anyway, that's a whole nother story. But we got a size of a small state. Like, I think it's the size of Pennsylvania in our West Desert, where the military is using it for something. And it's lots of crazy stuff going on.
There's so much potential in our West Desert. Just so much potential. We can do pumped hydro storage that we bring in, that instead of discharging it to the ocean, we discharge toward the Great Basin and restore our dried up saline lakes. Have you ever looked at the satellite view of the West? Starting at the Great Salt Lake, West, going toward California?
Probably not. I looked at the satellite view of the West Desert looking for, the airfield and what's going on there, and you can see some of it. But I think they're doing some like blurring out of some of the more specific things. I'm sure because
there's top secret stuff out there. When you look at that whole area, it's parched. But when pioneers arrived, there were saline lakes everywhere, and they went, we can divert water. We can make this whole area bloom. There's only so much water in the area, so it just dries out with climate change and everything else that's happening, which you can't deny. Man, Utah was so much wetter when we were kids. We have to do something different than what we're doing. Mm-hmm. What we're doing of just going decade after decade after decade of everyone just going, we hope that we'll change, and we're all praying for a solution. We have to step in and be that solution. We're human beings.
Well, our water policies in this state, for some reason, are so incredibly antiquated. You'd look, we go to Henderson, Nevada. They got Lake Mead, but they know it's drying up. They recycle every single bit of wastewater. And so when you open your tab, you're drinking the wastewater, but it's so clean and done so well, you never know the difference.
Do you know, here in Utah, if you're a farmer and you're irrigating your field and you stop using your water share. It'll be taken away from you.
Yeah.
So we've
Use it or lose it.
disincentivized the farmers to be more water wise. If you go out to Israel, the Israelis invented drip irrigation. So when you see their farm fields, everything's watered by drip, and it's using a tiny fraction of the water that we're using. But if any farmer in Utah tries to institute a drip irrigation system, they're now going to be dropped in what they have rights to only what that drip irrigation would provide for those crops that they decided to try it on. And so the farmers are terrified to try anything new for fear of losing their rights.
Yeah, it's totally asinine.
We need to make water policy that encourages them to use the latest technology to save water, but doesn't then penalize them should they change their crops later.
Yeah.
You know,
I wrote a story about this, and we have some friends who do grass-fed beef ranching, which I'm very much a proponent of. They do it out in Roosevelt, and they're improving the land as they intensively rotate cows. Like, cows will destroy a landscape if you let them just roam, but if they intensively graze one little area and then you move them, and then they do another area and then you move them and you move them, that actually replenishes the ground that they work on.
Well, that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. They're supposed to be migrating.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
it's
animals come
mimicking
in.
mass migration.
Yeah, so the predators keep them bundled for safety, and it bundles them really closely together. And then as they eat and everyone's all in one place, they defecate all over where they're eating, and they trample. So like all the dead brown grass gets trampled down instead of staying up as a fire hazard. They trample it all down. And then by defecating everywhere, pretty quickly the animals on their own are like, ugh, I don't want to eat my own poo. So they move then. And so instead of them overgrazing the land, the predators keep them tight. So farmers can mimic this. This is holistic ranching.
Yeah.
And so they come in and they try to mimic the behavior that the predators would have caused. And it restores the land, and it sequesters carbon.
I'm so glad you know this as a millennial, because this Beyond Meat movement and this idea that cows' farts are causing...
you can't take animals off the land.
No,
Every time they do that, it
large
degrades
herbivores
the land.
Absolutely produce...
Degrades.
But large herbivores created our Great Plains. There's 8 feet of topsoil in the Great Plains areas because the Indians knew this technology.
That's how it is in the Serengeti.
Yeah.
You go out to the Serengeti. It's
an incredible thing. And pasture-raised beef and pasture-raised pork and chicken, it's so much better for you because the animals are out getting sunlight, which they should be getting, and they're getting grass their whole entire life. But back to my point, this rancher told me that if he doesn't use his water, just like you said, it's the use it or lose it policy, that these ranchers will immediately suffer the ramifications, because down the irrigation ditch stream, if more ranchers are seeing immediately that they're not using what they're supposed to, then those ranchers will say, "Oh, I'm gonna open up that floodgate right now and use that water, and I can make an appeal to the state that should be my water, or that I should get that, and because this guy isn't using it." But they're flooding their fields like with 6 inches of water. And I just pointed that out when I was down there. I was like, dude, that's such a waste. And he just like kind of got after me. He's like, hey, you can't talk out against that, because that's exactly what they need to be doing. If they don't do that, it could be really bad for them.
This is an example of a law that we need to fix.
Yeah.
And it needs to be fixed immediately. This isn't something we should have talking heads about for another couple of decades. This is the kind of thing. We are in a state of emergency. Our state's drying out. We had so much snow that came last year to northern and southern Utah, but yet you go to the Great Salt Lake and, the level came up, but we're still like 12 feet down.
Yeah.
It's and this is Utah. When has it ever consistently dumped and dumped and dumped and dumped year after year? If it did, we'd have Lake Bonneville back. It doesn't happen, and Lake Bonneville started drying out 14,000 years ago and has been drying long before people started changing the climate here. It was already changing after Lake Bonneville failed. That's another cool thing you can see when you look at the satellite imagery. You can see where Lake Bonneville burst its pass and actually dumped this entire Great Lake over the course of 2 weeks.
Oh, really?
And so when I think of the Great Salt Lake, I think of it as the last drying puddle that was Lake Bonneville. And that little puddle is responsible for up to 40% of our snowfall every winter.
I was wondering how big of an impact that would have if that was just gone.
Yeah, we have some drought years where it's like 2%. But when pioneers arrived, that lake was twice as big as it is now.
Really?
Yeah, and when you go around the world and you see where they allowed lakes to dry up, saline lakes, terminal lakes like we have, or freshwater lakes, where human activity dried those lakes up, the effect on the weather patterns of that region, not only are they horrible and causing desertification, as bad as all of that is, it never comes back. Once you take the water out of that closed hydrological cycle, it doesn't come back. We would need another ice age to put it back.
You think about the vast scale of evaporation. I mean, that lake covers so many square miles, and it just goes on and on and on. And most of it's only 8 inches deep. It's probably evaporating so much water.
Oh, yeah. Imagine. If you look at satellite images from the 1980s when we had the floods and Governor Bangerter built the pumps to pump water from the lake to the salt flats before it flooded Rose Park, it's a lot of water coverage. It wasn't that much water that they pumped out, but when you look at the satellite image, I mean, we had a whole nother lake out there in the flats. Might have only been this deep, but it was this huge evaporative area. And if you remember what it was like here in the 80s, man, we got summertime thunderheads like we never get now. Huge storms that would build up every afternoon almost. And you'd see the clouds building up. And it's interesting, even just this year, sitting down in the middle of the valley where we got more moisture and the lake level did go up. I swear, but you can say that I'm wrong. You can make a study at it. But I swear, when I'm looking up at our sky and it's getting really hot, you're actually seeing more cloud building happening. Another interesting thing that happens on the lake, that salt gets aerosolized and it goes up into the air and seeds the clouds as they come through, which brings the clouds down lower and causes them to drop their moisture. So even if we get heavy water-laden clouds, if we lose the Great Salt Lake as this rain generator, we'll never have enough water to support the population of northern Utah anyway.
Yeah, it's asinine because we not only do we penalize the conservation of water, but unlike every other Western state, everybody's got green grass. Everybody waters their grass. Nobody's doing xeriscape. I mean, very, very few people are doing xeriscaping.
It's a small...
And there's no sort of like incentive for people to xeriscape and use less water.
There's also the fact that industry and agriculture use far more than the cities do. This is a talking point where they love to guilt all of the population. They love to guilt us about our lawns and what we're doing and how we're the problem. But it pales in comparison to what industry and agriculture use. And I'm pro-agriculture. Yeah. I'm just not pro-water wasting.
Yeah.
I'm pro-industry, but I'm not pro-huge tailing ponds full of cyanide that will burst in an earthquake and flood Magna. That bothers me.
You talking about Magnesium Corporation?
No, I'm talking about what our mine is doing.
Oh, how it's taking on water.
The Magnesium Corporation, we need magnesium.
Mm-hmm.
We need magnesium. But I don't know what it is now, but when I first left Utah, one of the reasons that I left was our horrid pollution. And we were home at the time to the second most polluting factory in the world, which was MagCorp.
Yeah.
That being said, I know the world needs magnesium.
Mm-hmm.
What our job as the government should be is making sure that when we're getting that magnesium, when we're getting that copper, that gold, all of it, that the citizens are being taken care of, that we're worried about their health, that we're actually worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we see that they're the bad health effects are coming from people's exposure to our economic activity. It's our job to mitigate and repair that damage.
Yeah,
I don't understand.
I mean, that's the next place. There's a massive disconnect.
Yeah,
I think that they. I mean, I can't think of it as being any other reason, but they've gotten campaign contributions from the right sources that say you are not touching industrial pollution. Because I've talked to the people up high about this, and we've studied red air for 6 years now at Utah Stories, and MagCorp is completely off limits. Since it was bought out by Renco, this guy's like a junk bonds dealer, and he has other super high polluting factories in, I believe his other one is in either Peru or near Ecuador. This guy knows how to buy off politicians because they will not touch MagCorp, and it's still polluting 7.6 million tons of chlorine gas into our atmosphere and our airshed, which is...
If you all know, our airshed doesn't go anywhere. It sort of hovers over.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I talked to the guy who's in charge of the Utah Clean Air Department. And by the way, that department has 100 employees. There's a lot of people working on clean air. The guy at the top's named Bryce Bird, and he said to me, I said, where's all that pollution going? That 7.6 million pounds of chlorine gas. And he said, did you see how high that tower is? Did you see how high up that goes? It's not even touching us. And I was like, how do you know that? Like, show me the science that says if you're putting chlorine gas 150 feet up in the air, that there's not some down current or weather pattern that's going to just move all that chlorine gas.
Can they show you that data?
I didn't ask him at the time. I wish I would have. It was really difficult to get the interview.
We should demand that data.
Yeah, I want to see the data because it's like if it's not going to us, is it going to Denver?
I don't want to shut anybody down. I don't. Yeah. I'm not trying to. I
truly want to understand the issue because I get sick every winter. I want to know why I'm getting sick. I don't think it's CO2 because I breathe out CO2.
Yeah, you want to know why you're getting sick, and you want to know, do we have a solution to fix this? If we don't, is someone going to work on a solution for this? Because we're all downstream and downwind of this stuff, and we want to just make sure that we're not going to get cancer. Yeah. Just a little ask, one small ask. Don't give us cancer.
Yeah, or asthma. Like we have one of the highest per capita rates of kids getting asthma, childhood asthma. Is that really great for our kids? Yeah, I was getting asthma 4 years ago, every winter. And it would just come as soon as there would be inversion type conditions, I would get asthma. And I had it as a child, but I never had it, as an adult. And it's just...
And remember, they love to tell you, they love to put out charts all the time that remind you that the dirty air is your fault.
Exactly.
It's entirely your fault. You're not the ones setting the regulations. You're not the ones trying to tell them that they shouldn't meet California's emissions standards and that we should have looser standards. You're not the one pushing more strict standards on citizens, but then selling that pollution to industries to come in and keep making the pollution anyway. It is not your fault as a citizen.
No.
It's the government's fault for failing you as a citizen.
Yeah, and their number one call to action on all the news networks, this is what bothers me about local news. Oh, it's Red Air Day. Try to use public transportation because then we'll all be so much better off. Like, I'm going to get out of my car, walk to a bus stop in this soupy, nasty conditions, breathe all that air, and get into a Trax or a bus? Are you kidding me?
Have you seen how not extensive our mass transit system is? When you say that to your average person living in suburbia, well, you need to not drive and you need to use mass transit. Why don't you just walk the 4 miles to the closest stop near you?
There were a lot of times, in my 20s when I didn't own cars and I was hopping from house to house and everything, where that's what I started doing is, oh, my buddy is 3 miles away. I'm not trying to figure out UTA's crappy system. I'm just going to walk the 4 miles.
Yeah.
There needs, and they're doing a little better, but yeah, Utah needs way better transit.
Well,
way better.
And it's just they're the way that the media, I believe, reports on this issue is they want to take all of their talking points from the PR department of the Division of Clean Air, which is they spend a lot of money on PR, and which is we need to tell people stop using your wood burning stove, upgrade your car that's polluting emissions, and use transit. Those are the only 3 talking points they ever use. They'll never talk about MagCorp. They'll never talk about what about having a off button on red air days.
It's funny what the city will do on these things. I'm not going to name names because I'm not trying to make trouble for people, but I had a friend who used to work with the state, and one day his boss comes out and says, "Hey, we need you to put together a campaign that says wind power saves water." And he looked at them and was like, "It doesn't." And they said, "Yeah, well, we've already told everyone it does, so we need you to make the campaign for that."
No way.
Yeah. And it was like just completely shocking. Like they'd already made their sound bites before they'd done any research to see if it actually did. And so it was his job to go and look at all this different data and find some way to tie wind power to saving water. And I believe he did. But it's one of those things where...
Was it because, like, somehow they'll stop damming up rivers if they have enough windmills or something like that?
Yeah, or maybe because they're using windmills, that means that they're not having to mine coal. And when they're mining coal, they're spraying water. But, they don't need to mine coal either. There's a whole bunch of ways to save water. Yeah. So... And wind power is great. I'm not talking down wind power. Like, they were doing whatever they could to try and get our air clean.
Well, this is like another political talking point that bothers me so much. Mayor Biskupski, before she decided to not run for mayor, she's like, "Okay, I've decided my major platform of my campaign is we will be on all renewables in Salt Lake City, the entire population by 2035. We're just going to do that." And I'm like, okay, right now, we've made some really great headway. We're down to 93% of our energy as a state coming from fossil fuels. We burn tons and tons of coal in central Utah, and we produce all of this electricity, and we've reduced it from like 97% to 93%. And that's amazing, to get 4% off fossil fuels. We've done that in like 7 years with tons of windmills that you see in the mouth of Price Canyon. We've done it with more solar arrays and more green energy. But there is absolutely no way by 2035 Salt Lake City is going to unplug from the Utah power grid of our central Utah coal facilities and get down to zero. There's absolutely no way.
And how are we really going to do that? I mean, is Salt Lake City planning to... Maybe they're going to use that land where the inland port was and build a bunch of solar panels. Like, what's the plan?
Yeah, well, I mean, how many billions of dollars would that cost in solar panels to get us off of the main power grid that we're on with the state of Utah?
If we want to get onto all renewables like that, we've got to go in a wildly different direction. We've got to be doing pumped hydro energy storage, which is the most efficient way to store renewable energy. Are you familiar with how pumped hydro works?
No.
So pumped hydro says when wind is blowing and turning a windmill, or the sun is shining, but you're not using that power, you need to store that energy somewhere. A lot of people do that with batteries, but pumped hydro, you use that excess power to pump the water uphill to an upper reservoir. And then when power is needed, you discharge downhill to a lower reservoir.
That's a cool idea.
And that stabilizes the renewable grid. One of the other things that are nice about that is you're creating more waterway systems where you're getting more evaporation. So for years, I've worked this idea in my head as I looked at all those dry saline lakes going all across Nevada and into California, and we can't figure out any way to jumpstart that ecosystem. And I thought, what if we do pumped hydro? What if we make a treaty with California and Nevada? We probably have to get federal help to pull this off as well. But when we're pumping uphill, pump toward a saline body like Lake Mona that's at, I believe, 6,800 feet above sea level. And then fill Lake Mona. Lake Mona's already a salty body, so we can just use seawater, maybe blast it with UV so that we don't bring in new microorganisms, but raise that water level up, increase that capacity, and then when we need it, instead of discharging back toward the ocean, discharge toward the Great Basin and start discharging into our dry saline lakes and actually reawaken an ecosystem that's been dead for 100 years. Bring all those migratory populations of birds back through, restore that wildlife in there.
Is there that much water?
In the ocean? Yeah.
Oh, you mean pumping it from the ocean?
Yeah, just pump it straight out of the ocean. Start in California and pump up and fill saline bodies that are drying out.
I've never heard of this either.
Yeah, instead of going back toward the ocean, discharge inland, because the Great Basin is a big bowl, and the salt flats are the low part. The Great Salt Lake is the very lowest. So discharge inland and start refilling all of those saline lakes. If I wish we were in front of a computer, I'd pull up satellite imagery right now and show you how it works. But every time that we've got excess renewables being produced, we just pump up and we always discharge east, as much east as we can go. When you've got big mountain ranges, if you've ever been whitewater rafting, you've probably seen where a huge pipe suddenly comes down one side of the mountain, goes under the river, and then goes right back up the other side of the mountain. And when you see it, you're like, how is this working? There must be so many pumps working at this. And it's not. They're using vacuum pressure. So as long as you're discharging at a lower point than you're starting from, as soon as you get that water flowing, vacuum pressure keeps pulling it. So we can...
That's a really cool idea, because we had it on the podcast a little while ago. We just released the episode on YouTube. These BYU students who came up with the most simple idea that's probably going to earn them $1 million. They probably could get a lot more if they actually marketed it on their own. It's just a micro turbine on your sprinkling system that powers your solenoid. So you no longer need a wire to power your solenoid for your solenoid valves.
Oh, nice.
I mean, just so simple, because you got the pressure in the pipe already. It's flowing. Well, as soon as you turn on your system, they're like, you don't need to have this electricity source, and we've got pressure on all of our water lines. So maybe why not have micro turbines on more of our pipes going through our cities and generating electricity? It's just such a simple concept.
Yeah, I love it. Just ways that we can recycle energy.
Yeah, and these were like young millennials, and they just thought up the idea.
This pen that I have here, it's a stylus, and I'm writing on digital paper. So I've got like 100,000 pages of paper here, and I never have to change the battery in this stylus because it's got a little actuator inside, and this motion, every time the pen moves like this little piston moves up and down and charges power inside the pen. So I never actually have to power this pen in any way besides using it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I really believe that technology can solve so many of our problems. It's like I finally got a central air conditioner, because I didn't want one for so long, because my swamp cooler is great.
Yeah.
It just evaporates the water off the big, pad, and the pad's made out of grasses and natural products, and I loved it. But my wife's like, no, we're getting central air. It's too damn hot.
Well, yeah, and in a world of climate crisis.
Yeah, so it's a variable speed though. So rather than coming on and off, this thing has a technology where the fan blows according to the needs of the home. So it only starts pumping that air and using a lot of electricity when it starts heating up. And it stays on all the time. And instead of that burst of electricity to start up over and over again, this thing uses about 40% less electricity than a standard system. Wow. And if more people just got on that technology, and all of our central air conditioner units were using 40% less electricity, imagine the impact that would have, statewide.
It's interesting, just technology. We see how we're doing something, and we assume that this is the best way that we could be doing it. But time always shows us the next innovation comes in and usually simplifies the device in order to get it more energy efficient. If you look at a a TV screen today and you get in with a magnifying glass and look at it, all it is a bunch of little light bulbs, tiny little light bulbs.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just so small that
little micro LED lights.
Yeah, and the lights are just on, off, all over the place. And it's actually a really simple system how a television works now. But when the TV was created, you had this big tube that had gases in it. Yeah, the cathode ray tube, gases, and all those gases and lights are refracting off of all these precious metals that make images. Like that was like in the 50s, we were doing magic. What we're doing today is just simple computerized on-off switches, clicking on lights.
And a guy we had on the podcast earlier, those micro LEDs, they're now organic. So what organic LED is rather than silicone base, which uses another depleting natural resource of sand, making them organic, they're using carbon-based plastic, which will not be so intensively mined out of our, silica is very scarce. But being able to make an organic LED screen, it's like way less intensive than a traditional silicone based thing. And now they're doing organic solar cells. They're doing organic, all sorts of products made out of carbon instead of being silicone based. And all of our technologies transferring over to just use far fewer natural resources.
Oh yeah, switching over to graphene based products that alone will keep thousands and thousands of power plants from ever being built. We had this same thing happen when we started making all of our devices Energy Star, pushing everyone to do compact fluorescent lights. That was to prevent the construction of new energy production. But we can only reduce so far. We have to actually switch our grid off of fossil fuels. And I mean, I'm not against the use of oil. What an amazing substance. We can create anything out of it. However we align the carbon atoms, an infinite amount of products and things to solve all of society's needs.
Yeah.
And we're just burning it.
Yeah.
We've found ways to actually, like gasoline used to be a byproduct of all the other things that we did with crude oil. And now it's the main thing we do with crude oil. And we've actually figured out how to stack those carbon atoms differently so we can get more gasoline out of it.
Yeah, well, Huntsman Chemical. I mean, that's how they became billionaires, just making petrochemical products.
Yeah, and you
have all these different products.
You've got this limited resource that's infinitely amazing and is empowering humanity to become space age. And if we're the only beings in the universe, then we get to be the ones who go out and settle all the planets with people. And that's kind of a cool future. If you think about it, be a little like Star Trek. You always wonder in Star Trek, why does everyone look like a human? Maybe in the future it's because different humans will go to places like Mars, and because the gravity is different, because the atmosphere is different. After several generations, a Martian's going to be taller than an Earthling because they've got less gravity pulling on them. Just through natural selection, you're going to get people that stand up to more radiation.
You might be able to just do gene therapy so somebody could breathe the atmosphere, the Martian atmosphere.
And when you ask, where's the benefit in going to Mars? Where's the benefit in really building the society? Like, it's because we can't.
I guess my problem with it is I know this is the equal rallying cry. Let's save this planet first. Let's realize how precious this place, that Antarctica is far, far better place than Mars. If you wanted to colonize an area, use the wastelands of the West Desert of Utah, which is the size of Pennsylvania. I mean, if they ever, BLM lands or whatever.
I don't understand why it's always an if this, then
I mean,
that.
yeah,
Why isn't it just
I guess
Mars and Antarctica?
I see that we have the problem, like you mentioned, of desertification, and lots of places are losing their topsoil. We're eroding our topsoil everywhere you look, and we can build it up through things like intensive grazing and farm management practices and smart agriculture. And why why is that not a stronger rallying cry than let's go to Mars?
You know, there's an interesting thing that's going to happen with going to Mars. We're going to have to figure out how to terraform Mars. Like all space technologies, when we figure out how to do something in space, that generally always gets reverse engineered into a consumer product. So if we want to figure out how to terraform Mars, let's start with the West Desert. Let's start with Nevada.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do pumped hydro, bring salt water in,
figuring out
re-stimulate.
how to stimulate the soil biology to operate in a saline soil environment.
If we go, I can take you to Key West where I've been living, and I can show you all the vegetable products that grow right there in that super brackish, ocean, salty environment. And we could recreate that stuff here in Utah. Do you know, with the climate change, when they show projections, this area should become subtropical within 50 to 80 years, where we are here in northern Salt Lake. And this is just according to how NASA sees the climate changing. They're watching it with satellites. And if that trend continues, by the time my son is an old man, they're going to be dealing with subtropical. No more snow, but subtropical. Now, we can have subtropical dry, which is the direction that we are careening down. Or we can look forward multiple generations, and we can say, when those people look back at us, I want them, we should all want them to look back and say how amazed they are at the ingenuity and forward thinking of our generation here in the 21st, where we got our collective shit together and just fixed this. We can do anything we want, absolutely anything. We've proven this over and over again. All we have to do is get together and fix it. And fixing the environment is profitable. The West Desert, all we use it for is blowing up right now. So if we go out there and we do flooded deserts to try and stimulate more rain and snowfall, if we go out there and we change how we're doing our water so we get more greenery for less water, we'll make sure that when in 80 years, when this is a subtropical environment, that it's a lush subtropical environment and not a dry desert. Mormons came here to make the desert bloom, and we kind of forgot what we were doing. And it's time that we remember why the pioneers came here and fix it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So we haven't even gotten into your platform. I think
We're
these.
an hour and a half in.
Well, I would like to know, like, where you stand. I mean, everybody's going to look at you and wonder, first of all, are you a Republican or Democrat? What, like, are you going to run? Are you going to run with a party, or how are you going to do this?
So this was a difficult decision for me to make. I am a centrist. I might have some ideas that seem really out there, but they're usually about saving the environment, and I don't understand why saving the environment is a radical ideal. Conserving the world that we must have to rely on to live, that seems conservative. Yet the idea of conservative is like radical exploitation, which just seems backward, upside down.
I've never understood how, if you call yourself a Republican, then you have to believe that exploiting all of our BLM land natural resources is the very best policy, always. Like, why does that have to be connected?
But that doesn't seem conservative.
No, that
doesn't seem
seems
conservative at all. That seems radical.
Yeah, and that seems like so contrary to what our state offers. Like, yeah, it's wonderful. We have more minerals in this state than I think any other state in the 50.
Well, but we're shipping them all straight out.
Yeah, and they're all run by giant conglomerates.
Yeah,
I mean, Kennecott is Rio Tinto, where they have facilities all over the world. But my point being that we have locked up in this state more mineral resources, but besides that, more natural resources in abundance that makes so many people want to come and visit our parks, visit our places of where we have such pristine wilderness and beauty. Why do we want to just totally screw that all up by exploiting, getting a little bit more magnesium, copper, gold, silver, everything out of our beautiful mountains.
So I've always been an unaffiliated voter, always. And I voted for different parties, everything. If you look in Vote Builder, which is the system that shows where voters fall based on their behavior, you can't see how people voted, but you can see what car they bought. You can see what petitions they've signed.
You can determine what streets you need to canvass to win to become
exactly.
governor.
And that's what everybody does. It's interesting things you learn when you're trying to run for public office is how do these people get a hold of you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, voter records are public, but you can take voter records and then you can overlay that with consumer behavior.
Do they have a Subaru?
Yeah. Do they have a Subaru? Do they drive a
do
Jeep?
Do they have a golden retriever?
Yeah,
Those two things alone would tell you where they're.
The first time I saw this system, the first time I was like, oh boy, where do I fall, unaffiliated voter? And they pulled me up, and this is a scale of 0 to 99, 0 being Republican, 99 is a Gold Star Democrat, and I fell at 51.
Jeez.
Smack in the center.
Centrist.
And there is no centrist party. You have radical this or radical that. That's it. And the independents, they're kind of all over the place.
Well, and I might even argue that they're just not that different anymore. Republican and Democrat, I mean,
two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I mean, if you take away abortion and you take away the issues of, gun rights, they're the same. They're both for corporations. They're all about helping big pharma become bigger. Nobody's talking about reforming the FDA or the USDA. It's how are they really different anymore?
For me, they're just colors. Red team, blue team, yellow team, green team. I'm a human being. So when I looked at all of it, I went, okay, I can't go the Republican route because, we're in this mess. They've had decades of undisputed rule, and we've seen what they've done. We've seen what they've done. I cannot associate my name with that party. I'm a capitalist, but at the same time, I'm tired of them acting like socialist is a dirty word. My mom uses Social Security. My best friend has schizophrenia and he's on disability. My brother has epilepsy and is on disability. These people need this help. We can't have people on the street. Medicare, Medicaid. These are social programs. Food stamps is a social program. When you lose your job and you get unemployment, social program. These are the social safety nets that make sure that when go-go capitalism busts, go-go capitalism is amazing for earning wealth. Absolutely amazing. But when it busts, it's the worker, it's the average citizen who falls flat on their face. The wealthy just pull their money back, wait for all the property values to go down, and then they come in like vultures and gobble everything up. We need social safety nets so that these capitalists can go do what they do best. Make money, bring it in, everything. But society has to step in there and make sure that we mitigate the damage caused by go-go capitalism, but we still want go-go capitalism so that it can fund rich social programs. Capitalism's the best system in history for providing wealth to as many people as possible.
Yeah, you can't be too far on the left and say that. Unfortunately, and that's what really bothers me is the idea of capitalism, and you mention capitalism, and it's almost like you're saying a bad word. But if we would not be sitting here today with LED lights and all this technology and all this ability to stream to YouTube to potentially a billion people, if it were not for capitalism.
Yeah, capitalism
it's like
pays
the
for
greatest
this.
way to create wealth.
The absolute best way to create wealth. Been proven over and over and over again.
But why can't you say that if you're too far on the left? Why do we
the
have to
thing
demonize
is,
it?
Yeah, and for me, so I'm an absolute capitalist, but I'm also an absolute socialist. Why don't we have a centrist party that's called the capitalist socialists? If you look up capitalist socialists, they act like they're two mutually exclusive systems.
Well, what do you mean you're an absolute socialist? What do you mean by that?
I think that everybody deserves the human right to have a place to sleep, to lock up their stuff, and to take a shower and go to the bathroom. These are things that we do not need occurring on the street. We don't need people going to the bathroom on the street. We don't need people showering in our public parks and the drinking fountain. We don't need people shooting up on the streets. People need to be off the street.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't say that we need to go out and provide everyone a single-family home. That's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to house people in some way because we've gobbled up all the land. You can't go be feral.
Do you think
anywhere.
there should be big shelters for people, or how would you accommodate that?
I would accommodate this by requiring that when we're building, that we take into account the entire population of the region where we're building. And if we're going to build a luxury mega tower, then within a block, we need to have something where the workers can live, where the workers can afford to be. So if you want to build that big mega tower, there better be worker housing somewhere in there, or there better be worker housing nearby so those people can walk to work. Because otherwise, we don't want your mega tower, because your mega tower is going to drive our real estate prices up, and it's going to cause more working class people to lose their homes.
That's an interesting idea. So, like, right now, the cap on building a residential tower is extremely low. It's like, I don't know how many stories, but why not tell the developer, okay, we'll let you build a 50-story tower if you can provide worker housing within a 5-mile radius where people could walk to work and serve.
We have to think about a future that doesn't rely on the automobile.
Yeah.
So we're going to keep bringing all these businesses in. We can't just keep loading I-15 and 215 and I-80 with progressively more traffic. It doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
We need people to be on foot. And we also need to make sure that we don't take every bit of developable land right now, today, and put a squat wide building on it. Because you can't take that building down for probably 100 years. And that building's got to get condemned before it comes down. Or you got to buy every owner out of that building. They're making them into condos with individual owners. So we have to decide today how we want our skyline to look for the next several generations.
So your brand of socialism is basically just being able to provide the needs for all of the population. You're not saying you want to have the means of production controlled by government. That's the ultimate socialist.
No, government
solution.
should only step in and control a means of production when private industry is failing. And private industry fails sometimes. They succeed, but
that's a slippery slope.
Look at our prison system, man. It's terrible. It's terrible. Look at across the country as we've privatized prisons. And
prisons should not be privatized.
Prisons being run as a for-profit institute?
Because now you have a prison lobby group. I heard about this. The prison workers have a lobby group that are against legalization of cannabis because there's not going to be enough inmates. That's just sickening.
The contracts
That's the worst thing I've ever heard.
The contracts they have for the prisons have occupancy requirements. Mm-hmm. So if the states don't maintain like 93% occupancy, they have to pay a fine to the prison system for not providing enough inmates. But
wow.
Our whole point of our prison system should be reforming people and making a better society.
Getting them out of prison.
It's called the Correctional Institute. Like, do you know that when you're in the jail, the officers can write you a citation, and if you get like 3 of these citations, it automatically extends your sentence. Only a judge can write your sentence. You can't have officers that can just give you these pieces of paper, and if you piss them off enough, your sentence is extended.
Well, let's back up a little bit, because you say that they can take away your funding if you don't maintain an occupancy level.
It's not take away your funding. The state owes you money because they didn't meet their requirements to deliver you inmates. Because they're the prison,
the private prison
is,
system.
Yeah, it's like a
hotel. The state
hotel.
owes you money.
Think of it like a hotel. So this hotel. So I sell travel, and when I'm trying to go in and make a new tour in, say, Israel, I'm going to go in. I'm going to find the hotels, and I'm going to ask them to hold inventory for me because I expect to move X amount of clients into that hotel on that date. With our prison contracts, The prison contract says, okay, the state expects to move this many consumers, prisoners, whatever you want to call them, into our private prison, and we're going to get X number of dollars for that.
Okay.
If the government does not meet their occupancy requirements, this is the fine they have to pay. And in general, that fine is more expensive than the cost of housing the prisoner. So it incentivizes the state to put the prisoner in prison.
Why would it be set up that way, though?
Because they privatized it. Like, what? This is a for-profit enterprise. Like, if you don't go in and regulate...
But if the state's goal is to minimize recidivism, then why would they set it up so that they're punishing themselves by not maintaining
What makes you think that's the state's goal?
Well, because it's called the Correctional System, Department of Corrections.
Then why is it doing such a bad job correcting everything? Do you know what is it? What do they call it? Department of Peace or whatever?
I'm not sure.
And this is all just double speak. It's all in 1984.
Oh, yeah. It used to be called the Department of Peace. Before it was called the Department of War. Something like that.
Yeah. It's you say what you want people to think. You don't want to say prisons. That sounds terrible. That you don't want to say slave labor camps. That sounds terrible. You got to say correctional facility. That sounds better. We're just correcting them.
I mean, all languages we've talked about it. All languages is a magic trick. It's a sleight of hand. It's here. We're telling you the truth, but we're really not telling you the truth.
Have you ever been to the jail?
The Salt Lake City jail? I've never gotten in jail.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of my friends.
When I was 18, freshly an adult, I got a speeding ticket. And I promise you, I was not in the wrong. It was that van that went speeding past me, but I was a young guy in a sports car. So I'm the one who got pulled over. So I went, okay, I'm going to go fight this. I looked up the laws. I'm like, okay, here's my fine, which I could have afforded to pay that fine. But I felt it was unjust. So I said, I'm going to go to court. I'm going to fight this, and I'm going to get this cleared. And I looked at the law, and if they found me guilty, I could pay that fine, or I could just take the jail time, serve the infraction for 3 days.
Yeah, I've always thought I would do that.
So I'm looking at that, and I'm like, okay, actually it would cost the state a lot more to house me for 3 days than this fine. So that's going to be my wild card that I pull out.
Yeah, throw a wrench in the gears of the
system. So this was my initiation as a new adult into what our system was like. And I went in to see the judge, and the cop shows up, of course. Everyone's like, oh, the cop never shows up. That's not true. They totally show up. They've got nothing better to do. So cop shows up, and the judge gets up and says, okay, let's see how fast we can get this done. And he turns to the officer and says, okay, officer so-and-so, do you want to tell me what happened? The officer says, I pulled over the hill. He came over the hill. I scanned him with my radar gun. I pulled him over, gave him a ticket. I don't know why he's fighting this. And the judge turns to me and says, sounds like you're guilty. How do you want to pay your fine? He didn't say, give me your testimony. Nothing. Just turned to me and said, sounds like you're guilty. And I said, I don't intend to pay this.
The same exact thing.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't intend to pay this fine. I didn't commit the crime. You haven't even heard testimony from me. So he says, okay, Zach, give me your testimony. He's rolling his eyes at me. It's really rude. I couldn't believe that this guy did this.
This is crazy.
Yeah. And so I tell him my story of how it was another vehicle, when I was on the other side of the hill, that vehicle crested that hill. Cop had to have clocked them. I had my cruise control on. There's no possible way that I was speeding. And the judge kind of nods his head and then turns to the officer and says, is any of that true? And the officer says, no. And the judge turns back to me and says, well, the professional witness says you're a liar, so how do you want to pay your fine? So that was my introduction
really similar
to that.
To my experience. It's an absolutely futile gesture to try to fight a ticket that they say that you deserve and you should pay, but you shouldn't.
So I quote the law. Because of that, I quote the law. And I said, no, I'm not going to pay for this. And I'm not going to do community service. I didn't commit this crime. So you can just give me the jail time. This is an infraction. It'll cost the state more to house me than you're going to get out of me if I pay this fine. So if you want to put this unjust judgment on me that you haven't even allowed me to defend, then give me that jail time. That's and you can cover that bill. And the judge says to me, oh, it sounds like we've got a young hotshot that needs a lesson. And just bailiff. They put cuffs on me. They take me out. They didn't issue sentencing. He simply just hit his hammer and said, "Bailiff, get him out of here."
Really?
And so I sit there. It's all day. I go through this horrible process that remind me of Shawshank Redemption as they book me into this system. I get shots that they won't tell me what they are. I'm in this pit with like crazy people, like the amount, and they've just put them all in a pit while they hold and decide what you're going to do with these people. And I'm just witnessing the whole thing and talking to everyone because I'm a chatty Cathy, trying to find out how they all got in here. But I don't even know why I'm in here. No sentence was issued. It takes all day before someone will talk to me. And I'm in for contempt of court. And I have 15 days. They didn't tell me I had 15 days before they hauled me out. But I've got 15 days contempt of court. And I get to see what our prison system looks like. I get to see the hamster cage walls that we have, the concrete beds with no mats, the toilets where you got to take a crap out in front of everybody else.
Wow.
It's completely dehumanizing. Salt Lake County Jail. Horrid.
Yeah, I
Most
heard,
horrible
I heard
experience.
It is like the lowest depth of hell.
It's made to dehumanize you. And nothing about being in that correctional facility was going to make me a better person. Mm-mm. That's where I could meet the drug dealers. That's where I could meet every troublemaker, rabble-rouser in there. The officers that were booking me were like, "What are you doing in here?" And the fact is, I'm a stand-up comic. I was doing comedy at the time. I thought this would be great material for my set. No, it was just horrible. I have nothing but horrible things to say about it, and it's wrong. The whole situation's immoral.
And you didn't serve 15 days?
No, I called my mom and was like, "Mom, they can't hold me in contempt if I pay the fine." And my mom went and paid the fine, so I had to serve a day of jail time and vowed I would never, ever allow myself to be put in that situation again. Yeah. But it didn't make it any less wrong. And to make this even worse, I recently went to a business meeting by Salt Lake County, and it was up at Snowbird. All these businesses were together trying to network and make stuff happen. And I went out onto the promenade, and there were all these booths where vendors were trying to sell us products. And one of the booths was the state correctional facility. Mm-hmm. And so I walked by all the booths, as I always do, because I'm a capitalist. Mm-hmm. I walked by this booth to see what they're selling, and they're selling slave labor. They're selling an anti-capitalist slave labor problem. And why I say anti-capitalist is the free market can't compete with slave labor from the prison. So these prisoners are making $1 something an hour at most, well below minimum wage. And I say, well, that's illegal. You have to at least give them minimum wage. And they say, oh, well, they're prisoners. They don't have any rights. They're not human beings at this point.
He said that to you?
No, this is me. Said I'm saying what they're not human beings. And I actually said that. I was like, so you're just saying they're not human beings? They've lost all of their citizen rights?
And you could buy their labor to come and do stuff for you?
You can buy their labor.
I didn't know
And so they wanted me to come in and not hire a local printer. Instead, hire the prisoners. And I said, well, how can you justify paying them that kind of money? I can't in good conscience do this. Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, it costs a lot to house these people. It's not free to have someone in the prison. We've got to be able to make money to pay for all of this. They're not there by choice. This isn't a hotel. The fact that the state decided to put them there meant that we took on the responsibility of paying for that burden. They don't...
Or release all these low-level offenders with, marijuana and stuff.
Hey, marijuana's not even a big deal. It's so absurd.
Well, I think if you're talking about serious felons who aren't fit for society, they are super expensive, and there should be some sort of labor for them to do. It's better than them sitting watching TV
so let's put them to work building some public works stuff.
Yeah,
why on earth are we
why
private enterprise?
Why would they go out into the free market and bid out the labor of the
undercutting
prisoner?
the free market where people are receiving livable wages.
Idea. I support work programs within the prison. We wrote a story about how prisoners were growing this giant garden, and I thought that was awesome. They grew a 300-pound pumpkin, and this guy won a contest, and I thought that was great. But I mean, I've never heard of that.
I think that's awesome, but I don't think it's okay for a for-profit enterprise to be able to come in and get get any workers. It does not matter if they're in our correctional facility. You can't come in and get human workers.
So was
not
this
give
Salt
them
Lake
a
County
decent
jail
wage.
inmates, or was this?
This was the state correctional
state
facility.
correctional inmates, and you could go and buy their labor.
Oh, this is a standard thing, and people do it all over the place. You have
had no
way more
idea.
products than you realize that are made by prison labor.
Well, we learned. So Department of Agriculture has a division called Utah Zone. They're actually great. They promote
I love
buying.
Utah Zone.
Yeah, they promote buying Utah products. It goes in line with our Made in Utah festival. They're a sponsor of our festival. And the director had all these beautiful bags made and these aprons, and they're awesome. And then she told me the state prisoners made them, and they had to use them as required by. I don't think it's a law, but it's just a mandate that if you're a state agency, you and there's a state program that provides like printing services, then they have to use it. And I see your point with like if they're there on charges of marijuana and then they're being now exploited, their labor. But if they're like some felons or they're don't have anything else going on, it seems like that would put their at least give them the confidence that they can put their labor to good use.
You got to stop there a second. Those marijuana offenses are felonies.
Oh, I guess
those are felonies.
Schedule 1. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, we have a lot of people.
Felons.
When I'm the governor, I'd like to free some of those slaves. Those are people that do not belong in there, and I'm very pro-family. And we've got families that have been torn apart over someone
who's there
lighting a joint.
On marijuana charges, they should definitely be getting out. I
and
absolutely agree.
Non-violent offenders should not spend that amount of time in that horror hole. It's so awful. We should have prison day where we open it up and like once a month, the prisoners all go in their cells, they close them, and the citizens get to walk through the whole prison. See everything, not just a visitor's center. See the conditions that we're keeping these human beings in.
Yeah.
Like Guantanamo Bay is horrid. We've all seen pictures of that. Have you taken a look at a Utah prison?
That's a good point.
Have any of us taken a look inside? Because I'm pretty sure you have to be a prisoner.
They are super strict on filming. And this was actually not in a Utah prison, but I was on a reservation, an Indian reservation, and they had that thing like packed full of Native American prisoners on the reservation. And I was just like, started talking to a guy who's really cool to talk to. And I started filming, and they confiscated my camera, all of my tapes. This was for a documentary project. And they're just like, okay, we decided we can give you your camera back. But absolutely, we're keeping all the tapes.
Yeah, because if you put that footage out, it would destroy their whole scheme that they've got going.
Yeah, because they weren't even in one of the little holding facilities. There was not even enough room for the guys to like squat down.
Here's my prison plan. It costs like $50,000 a year to put someone in prison. So why don't we take people? Okay, we find you on the streets and you're doing meth. And, instead of putting you in the prison and spending $50,000 there, we're just going to put you straight in the Get Right program of some kind. We're going we're going to take that money and, we got you on the street. Nope, we're putting you to work. You're going to go up to this camp. You're going to chop wood. We're going to get you off the meth. We're going to just take it down. And then we are going to be your mentor, and we are going to actually rehabilitate you. And we're going to get you working and on the right path. Because that's the right thing to do. Just putting them in that facility and holding them there and then having a bunch of pretend programs to make them do better. But then when they're released from prison, they're just dumped on the street now with a felony on their record, so they can't get a decent job. They can't live anywhere because no one wants that felon in their neighborhood. So you've given this person a scarlet letter. And how do you ever expect that person to rehabilitate if the punishment is forever, even after you get out?
It's terrible. It's terrible, and I know from a family member getting that expunged, that can take years and years and years before you get it expunged, so you can get a. Yeah, it's just unbelievable, and the cost of hiring the attorney to help you get it expunged, it's awful because that stain, and like you said, is on your record, and even if you're smart and you have an advanced degree, like this family member of mine has, it's just awful.
The only way that you will recover once you got into that system is the kindness of strangers, or if you have a big family that can absorb you while you get your shit together.
Yeah, that's
like
been the case in my family.
We need to be an example of what a mentor state can be. Like, we need to be... We're founded by Mormons. It's all about like making everyone the best they can be, and community, and lift each other up and share each other's burden. How could we allow such a large portion of our population to just be swept under a rug?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's a very important issue. That could be a great piece of your platform to run on, because it's just when I saw them decide to rebuild our prison and move it
into the delicate wetlands,
yeah, and away from the main population center, it's really easy to get to the prison in Bluffdale because it's right off the freeway. And the best point I heard brought up is these people, if your objective is to have it be a correctional facility, the number one thing that's making them want to correct is seeing family members. To make it much harder for family members to go out and see them is the worst thing you could do. And they expedited that prison move. I know because the state legislature members had land all around the prison, and they want to turn that area into a much higher, better use of the land than how it's used in Draper.
Yeah,
right
and
now.
I mean, speaking on that, why don't we turn that prison land into like our equivalent of Central Park? We've got so much pollution in this valley. Let's get some more trees on that land and make it beautiful. Like, we don't need to pave over all of our empty land. We don't need to, and it's wrong and kind of immoral.
And I think you talk about global warming. I don't know why they don't talk about what's the temperature of asphalt compared to the temperature of soil.
What's the temperature of the mining tailings that used to be on the... we used to call the Cypress Mountains the Green Mountains. There were trees as big around as like a VW bug over there. Those all got cleared, and then now we've been doing this huge open pit mine that in the last 10 years has taken up, looks like half the mountain range. And it's just barren earth, just dry. Talk about desertification. And that messes with our weather patterns. Removing the trees in the first place messed with our weather patterns, and now we're making barren earth. We could plant industrial hemp on there like the Chinese do to clean up their mines. We could plant industrial hemp on it, green it up, low water usage, send chains down the mountain to just mow it down and build new topsoil and get all that arsenic buried. So that like right now, every time wind blows across that mine, we've got arsenic blowing into the city, and we all have to breathe that.
Wow, I don't know much about that, but it's... Do you know when that giant pit is going to be done? When they're going to be done?
When the mountain is gone.
When the entire mountain's gone.
They've, we were in high school when they made this deal to let Kennecott out from under their dirty mine, and we let Rio Tinto come in. And Rio Tinto's, I believe, changed hands since then. So at the time, they're like, oh, it's an Argentinian mining company, and they'll bring all of these new modern practices. And if you take a look at that mountain, the only modern practice they've had is juggernaut machine that just grinding the entire mountain up. And then they run acids and all kinds of stuff through those tailings that they don't know how to dispose of. So out in the West Desert and up above Magna, we just have giant tailings ponds. And what do there's no plan for that. And they're just mining away endlessly at our mountain. And, in Alaska, you get a check. You get a dividend. They come in and they rape the natural environment, which is not good, but they try to at least, make the citizens feel better, pat you on the back. And don't worry, we gave you a check. Like, where's ours? You've got students who are drowning in debt, and the jobs they were promised didn't exist. And yet our wealth is being liquidated. And if you look at that mine on the west side of Salt Lake City, go down south and look at Escalante and Bears Ears, where they changed that. And the mine up here in the Salt Lake Valley gives you an idea of what it's going to look like down there after the industry is done with it. They were promising us. From the time I was a kid, I used to go to Kennecott, and look at all the displays. I was very excited. This is what we use these materials for, and the spaceships and everything. It was really cool. I don't know if you went.
I did. Yeah, I thought it was really exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. You could look into the pit and just, so cool. But then they had all these models of what they were going to do to mitigate their damage. How it was going to look and how they were going to make it better. And it's okay that they were damaging it now because they were going to make it better. I was a little boy when I first saw those. And now I'm approaching middle age. And they're not going to make that better. That's going to become a Superfund site that we're all stuck with the bill cleaning up. Our next generations will get to clean that up. And they need to start cleaning it up now while they're mining. I'm not telling them they have to stop, but they have to start cleaning it up now.
It's like the question becomes, if you go to Moab, that project, where they're taking all the tailings, and they've been doing it for 20 years, putting them on rail cars, nonstop, all day, every day, taking them out to Crescent Junction. That project, I mean, that's like uranium tailings that probably lasted like 30 years of tailings, and that was when the backhoes were much smaller than what they're using at Kennecott. And now we're like 20 years into the project. You can see they're getting down, but still, how many more? Maybe 10 more years?
My dad used to work in those uranium enrichment mills when he was in his 20s, and he died a very violent death from acute respiratory distress syndrome, which means we don't know what's going on. Your lungs are hardening and turning into stone, basically. Wow. And we don't get it. And it was this very violent, awful death that my whole family had to witness. And my brother was digging through an old Foot Locker after he died and pulled out these pay stubs from this uranium mine. And none of us knew that he'd worked there. None of us.
Really?
And my brother starts looking into all of this and finds out there's a reparations program because they deliberately hurt these workers. They deliberately gave them fake protection. They let these guys get exposed to all this uranium, and then they secretly monitored them throughout their lives. And my mom got, like, from 2 different programs, like 2 different checks for $200,000 in reparations for that. And now they want to reopen those mines? Are you kidding me? There's uranium in space. We need a spaceport. Like, of course, uranium. It's awesome. We can do all kinds of stuff with it. But St. George is still downwind. That didn't change. The cancer rates are still way higher down there than they are in other parts of the state due to what we did with uranium. And we're talking about doing new nuclear weapons? Do we not understand that the reason we stopped doing all of that, all the atmospheric testing, was because we were accumulating genetic defects in the entire human population globally? That's why we banned atmospheric testing.
Awful. Everybody's got to go see the show Chernobyl. That's the best well-done series I've ever seen on how incredibly awful nuclear can be when you don't do it right.
Getting exposed to this stuff causes mutations in germline DNA. So that means there are defects that I have. There are defects in my genetic code and in my siblings' genetic code that were caused from my father working in a uranium mine. I was never in the mine, but technically if you look at mine or my family's DNA, you should be able to find defects, mutations caused from that. And all humans, due to atmospheric testing, have that. We don't need to reopen this.
Do you think that nuclear could be a viable alternative, though? An alternative energy source?
Alternative to what? We already use nuclear.
Well, to the degree that we stopped building nuclear plants after the Yokoshima, is that?
Yeah, they're a lot safer than they used to be, but, I mean, go read up on what's happening in fusion power right now, and that doesn't come with that same radioactive byproduct. They're already bringing test tokamaks onto the grid in other parts of the world, and the tokamak I think it was invented by the Russians, but it's the most stable way for holding the plasma together. And they're using AI
way
now.
Safer.
Yeah,
so many fail-safe systems attached to any sort of power
I think
generation.
Nuclear, the new facilities, smaller facilities, much safer than the ones that melted down from the 70s and everything. But do we really want more uranium tailings in our rivers again.
Yeah.
Do we want to
Yeah, I
reopen
guess if
that
there's-
can of
if
worms?
there's
There's
a better
uranium
way.
elsewhere in the world. We have a 1.6% unemployment rate in Utah. Do we want
Yeah.
that job?
Well,
Bring
that-
us good jobs. Stop bringing us garbage.
Uh-huh.
Or stop bringing us stuff that kills us. Let's tourism. This is the most beautiful state in the country. More national parks than anyone else. Tourism, so much more money in tourism, and you don't have to rip things apart.
That's an interesting point, because I brought that up to a lot of folks that I met in Helper. And Helper's got an interesting sort of dichotomy there, because there's a lot of new residents who are into the art community there, who are into the beauty and the natural, beauty that's all around in Carbon County. But then you got the old folks and some, middle-aged people who are like, we do not want a tourist economy here, because you could have the most amazing mountain biking trails in Helper. Those box canyons go out deep, and there's some incredible trails, and they could develop that. But this older generation, they're like, no, we want real jobs. We want to mine coal. We want to have, there was a coal liquefaction idea that was the Canadians had, that they were going to bring in this technology, and they're like, yeah, that's real. Those are real jobs. That's what we want. Do you think they've got a point with the tourism economies, which are so seasonally based, that they want real long-standing employment that lasts 12 months a year instead of during the season?
Well, tourism just pays better. So generally, what you'd really end up with is seasonal work, and then people having free time that they could spend with their families. Why should we all work like dogs? This brings me to another campaign point of mine. I said earlier I'm pro-family. We were promised a 6-hour work day back in the 30s. That's where they thought things were going. We were building factories, work week. We finally got Saturdays off. People used to work every day but church day. They would and all of a sudden we got Saturdays off. We could buy cars and go do fun things. And then the work week we had all this suffrage movements, and the work day became 8 hours, and they said with mechanization and everything like that, soon the average person will work 4 days a week and 5 or 6 hour days, and nothing. In fact, your average person now works three jobs just to make ends meet, because their wages have never increased despite massive economic explosion. Everybody in Utah that's from here is still making money like it's the 90s.
Yeah, it is a joke. And they talk about the giant technological revolution that's going to happen in the next 20 years, where robots will do everything and put everybody out of work. My question is, why don't we just decide we're going to use that innovation to make it so people can work less and spend more time with their families?
Raise wages, lower work hours, fill in the gaps with machines and software, and give people their families back. We've been serfs and slaves for almost all of human history. And thanks to the Industrial Revolution, we're starting to have freedoms.
Yeah.
But for some reason, that just came to a grinding halt mid-century. In the last century, that kind of movement came to a grinding halt. And now we're putting people in competition with machines. Machines are supposed to be there to help us, and instead it's like, you got to get so good at all of this stuff so that you can outpace that machine. Economies rely on money moving. That's it. Money's got to move. It's potential energy. We need to spread that money around and get that money moving. All money eventually trickles to the top. That's how it works. You go buy products. Those products are coming from this company. This company's doing its thing, and it moves all of its way up to the top. When we give tax cuts to the top, it just stays at the top. I've seen that many times over. When you give money to the lower classes, the poor classes, all of them, they don't have any money. So they rush out and they spend it. And so basically, to me, food stamps is a subsidy to the grocery store. You could give the money directly to the grocery store, or you could give it to a human being who goes and spends it at the grocery store. Either way, all that government money went to that corporation.
Yeah. I agree. Let's take a little break. When we come back, I want to have people become aware of how they can contribute to your campaign, how they can get on the bandwagon with the things you're talking about, because I'd love to see the things you're talking about gain more momentum and have your voice be stronger as we prepare to elect our next governor. So that'll be right when we come back. All right. Okay. For all those of you who were with us live, that was just a short break. And but I wanted to bring it back to, obviously, to get elected governor, you need to have some money, you need to have resources, you need to get your voice out there. That's the most important thing. And we obviously have a problem with that in our modern culture. We just don't give people equal airtime, and usually it is the people who get the most money who win. How do you plan on getting around that big hurdle?
Oh man, that is a big hurdle. I think a lot like what you're seeing in Bernie's campaign, Pete Buttigieg's campaign. They're grassroots movements. If I'm standing up for citizens, your average citizen, and that isn't me wanting to penalize the elite class. That's me just saying, hey, we can do things a better way. We can have win-win scenarios. Either way, though, there will be some economic losers in that. And those economic losers are often some of the biggest campaign contributors. So the only way that we can do this is through grassroots movements and people coming out. And everyone's gotten so used to just voting one color in Utah. You just go in and just pull that lever all the way down. We have to actually go out and get people hitting the ground, telling people you do have another choice. You have another choice. And so, yeah, to pull this off, I'm intending to drive all over the state. I'm going to be going in my Jeep, taking people with me. I'll bring my guitar, play some campaign songs. I've been writing them. I've never seen a politician get out and just start playing music, start trying to wake up a class of people. In the last election, there were 1.1 million registered voters in Utah. And when marijuana went onto the ballot, 200,000 people came out and voted for the first time only on marijuana.
Yeah, that
only
that
on
was
marijuana.
Incredible.
Yeah, so we're talking about a 20% increase in voter base because they finally gave them something that they wanted to say something
there was
about.
Finally a rallying call.
Yeah.
And I think you've got that. We have this growing separation between city interests and state interests. This divide is so prominent. Our ballot initiatives are being ignored. You obviously are stepping up for that reason. And man, I wish you all the best luck, because I think it's about time somebody did.
Yeah. You can go to my website, zachmoses.com. You can go to zacharymoses.com as well, but it's easier to just type Zach. ZACH.
Okay.
MOSES.com.
Right.
And it's not like a whole bunch of stuff on there, but there's a very prominent donate button. You can click over and see some of my positions. I keep adding more to the positions thing because the more I travel around and I talk to regular people, the more I realize how disenfranchised everyone is. And I'm like, oh, I gotta add another thing to the agenda here. And, so go to the website, ZachMoses.com. You can also find me Citizens for Zach Moses, Zachary Moses 2020 on Facebook.
And I would suspect a lot of people don't even know when we're voting. When are the gubernatorial primaries in Utah?
Let's see, they're I believe in June is when the primaries are happening. So I'm allowed to start collecting signatures in January.
Okay.
If I were to go the signature route. It's March, I think March 8th is the filing deadline. So what I've done is file my disclosures, which in Utah, it's the closest equivalent we have to an exploratory committee, is to just file your disclosures, because you're clearly now a potential candidate. It allows you to start raising money and everything like that. So that filing deadline in March is when we've reached that point and we say, okay, we've raised enough money, we've generated enough interest, it's worth it to do this filing and then fight for that primary.
Okay, so between now and March is pretty critical, because that's how you got to build your snowball up, get your momentum.
Yeah.
So people go online now and just even donate like Bernie Sanders, $10. That'd be great.
I mean, a few bucks makes a difference. There are 3.3, maybe 3.4 million people in Utah now. I mean, imagine if they all gave me $1.
Yeah.
Like
That
we
would
could
be
we
well
could
funded.
yeah, we could create some serious change.
Awesome.
And so it doesn't take very much to get involved, but we need it. We need it, and we need real change and real solutions.
I definitely agree. Well, Zach, thanks very much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Utah Stories Show. To get more information on the Utah Stories program, visit utahstories.com. You can also subscribe to our newsletter there. The newsletter is really the way to keep track of what we're doing and what we're covering. We mentioned a lot of the things we're covering. It was kind of cool. We came out with our 10-year anniversary issue of the magazine. I kind of think it's a funny fact. Nobody south of about 33rd South has heard of Utah Stories. And if you're discovering us for the first time, then I appreciate you tuning in and watching, all 4 of you on YouTube who watched our live stream. And I'm sure a lot of people will watch it. We had a few hundred visitors to our mayoral candidate video, and you can watch that on our YouTube channel. And until next time, I'm Richard Marcosian. Louis Lewis was our production coordinator, and Connie Lewis landed Zach on the show. Thanks to them, and we'll see you next time. The Utah Stories Show is brought to you in part by Curry Pizza. So Curry Pizza opened their first location in Bicknell, Utah. It was called Binda's Curry Pizza Palace, and it ended up being a huge hit with the locals. And what's interesting, Binda, despite being an Indian man and opening a tiny little restaurant in a tiny little town in Utah, had his restaurant recently featured on diners, drive-ins, and dives. He's like now blowing up the curry pizza concept. He has a location in West Valley. He offers pizzas like chicken tiki masala pizza, old world Mediterranean with fresh Italian sausage, spices, and he has something called a mango korma pizza. We've been eating it here at the office, and it is really delicious. I really suggest you go check out Curry Pizza. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you by Paisley's GrassFed Beef. So another thing we were munching on here at the office is Paisley's GrassFed Beef Jerky. It is really awesome. It's tender, it's moist, it's delicious. It comes in a pack that it maintains the moisture. You can now buy Paisley's at Harmon's, and you'll also find him at the biggest farmers markets around town. He's always at the downtown Salt Lake City Farmers Market on Saturdays. I think he's now doing also the Ogden Farmers Market on Saturdays, Park Silly Market on Sundays. On Friday is at the Liberty Park Farmers Market. This guy, Benjamin, is getting around, and Paisley's GrassFed Beef, if you go check out their website at paisleys.com, there's a special going on right now on ribeyes, and it's grass-fed beef. If you don't know, it's definitely more tasty than corn-fed or corn-finished beef. It's all I'll eat now because it's more sustainable. The animals spend their entire lives in fields, and you can feel good about eating beef again if you choose to eat grass-fed beef. The Utah Stories Show is brought to you by Curry Pizza, Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef, Utah State, home of the Aggies, Legend Sports Bar and Grill. We thank them for their support of this program.